Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine scheduled a visit to the White House along with several European leaders after President Trump backed Russia's demands that Ukraine give up a large portion of its territory in a direct peace agreement. Professor Alexander Model, Ukraine and Russia expert at Rutgers University, joins us to discuss the implications. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining us today.
As always, thanks for having me, ladies.
So Trump's current position reflects a total about-face from his original demands for a ceasefire and threats of sanctions against Russia. So where now does this put Zelensky?
On the one hand, it creates potential problems because it looked like up to the summit in Alaska, and afterwards, and immediately afterwards as well, it looked like Trump was sticking to his original plan to impose sanctions and so on. But then, as you know, things seem to have changed, and now he's come out with essentially a pro-Putin position. So that creates a problem for Zelensky, in as much as he's got to navigate these new waters. Is this the end of the world for Zelensky? Not necessarily. But as you know, Trump has changed his position. He's flip-flopped on Ukraine and Russia. How many times? 5, 10, 20? So is this ultimately the decisive and final position that Trump will adopt? Will he change the position in the course of his conversations with Zelensky and the Europeans today? Will he possibly change his position in the course of Vladimir Putin's subsequent attacks on Ukraine? 14 people were killed tonight. Amongst them were 2 children. Melania wrote a special letter to Putin in which she encouraging him to defend children. Although interestingly, by the way, she never mentioned Ukraine. It was just this generic appeal to save children, which is all very nice and good. But anyway, clearly Putin got the message. So is this the final position of Trump? Is he flexible? Will he change his mind? It's possible. The other point to keep in mind is that Zelensky has shown up with, I think it's 6 or 7 heavy-hitting Europeans.
That's what we were going to ask you.
Right. And
what do you think?
Well, this is impressive. I mean, on the one hand, I think it was an article in the Times that referred to them as Zelensky's bodyguard.
Oh, did they?
And clearly he's bringing them with him so as not to be dissed in the Oval Office, as happened back in February of this year. So there's strength in numbers. But more importantly, obviously, they are expressing their support of Ukraine, of Ukraine's position, and their opposition to whatever it is that Putin stands for and wants. Now, Trump can easily say no to anybody he wants to. I mean, he's already shown that to be the case. But at the same time, you can't just diss the Europeans and the Ukrainians all at once. I mean, it just doesn't look good. I watched the opening session of their negotiation just before we started talking, and Trump starts out with this very effusive introduction of each of the leaders. Everybody's terrific, great job, great friends of mine, and so on. And he expects significant progress to be made. Now, whether that's going to happen, I don't know. But it may mean that everybody's going to be looking for some kind of compromise solution that keeps Trump happy, doesn't necessarily alienate Putin too much, and keeps the Ukrainians and the Europeans happy as well. Zelensky faces a difficult task. I mean, he would have preferred to be told that the United States supports an unconditional ceasefire tomorrow. But all said and done, we don't yet know whether it's the end of the world. And as I said, I'm inclined to think it probably won't be. But then it's Trump. And
Exactly.
he could have them all assassinated in 10
Yeah,
minutes.
and you
You
said,
just never know with him, right?
no,
You
but
just
you
And
never
never know
know.
with Putin either.
with
You
the
have
two of
mentioned,
them,
yeah, you can't believe anything he says.
right?
Well, Putin lies,
So
as
does
does Trump,
Trump.
of course, but Trump contradicts himself continually. Putin doesn't. He's very consistent in his lying. He's very consistent in his mendacity and his arrogance. He doesn't sort of flip-flop and say, oh, Ukrainians are the greatest people in the world one day, and we've got to destroy them all the next day. Trump could say something like that, regarding, well, whichever people, nation, or leader he happens to be annoyed with at that particular time.
Right.
But he seemed very gracious in the opening remarks. Zelensky followed, and he too was very gracious. And Zelensky, you can see he's bending over backwards to be thankful for
Oh,
everything
yeah.
Yeah.
Trump does, which is, you got to do what you got to do.
Got to play the game, right?
Got to play the game,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now, prior to this, there was a kind of an unusual thing. Trump and Zelensky actually held a press conference where they answered questions from the press about what they wanted to talk about and so on and so forth. And a lot of people have said this is obviously highly unusual. You don't go talking about what you're going to talk about prior to having the meeting. So, what are your thoughts on that? That this is a kind of an
Well, it is
anomaly,
unusual.
really.
You're right. I mean, the press conference takes place after and not before, and it's supposed to enlighten the press about what actually transpired. So this is unusual. I'm guessing, I mean, this is pure guesswork on my part. To my mind, this is a good sign. I mean, it's not or let me put it this way, it's not a bad sign. To let Zelensky have an opportunity to express some of his opinions, some of his hopes, expectations, desires, suggests, again, with the caveat that this is Trump that we're talking about, suggests that Trump may be more or less open to actually listening to him and to the Europeans. And in Alaska, he let Putin speak first,
Yeah.
which is apparently
Yes,
completely contrary to protocol because it's always the host who speaks first and the guest
right.
who then follows.
And
So, maybe
waited
this
for
is
him. He was late.
yeah,
And
yeah. So maybe this is the new soft Trump, who wants to ingratiate himself with everybody he's involved with. Again, I'm being semi-sarcastic when I
I
say
think
that, of
Well,
so.
course.
I think more than semi. Um, there were so many, as the commentators like to say, bad optics about that whole Alaska thing. Trump's body language was kind of not good. He seemed kind of resigned and really deferring in a big way to Putin.
He even called him the boss.
Yeah,
You know that?
yeah. I read that
Yeah,
someplace.
he did.
Well, it started out with the red carpet treatment, which, I mean, honestly, that's kind of unnecessary. The red
Yeah.
carpet obviously suggests that this is a very special guest. And again, I can see sucking up to Putin in the preliminaries to the meeting if the intent was to sock it to him at the meeting. You kind of soften him with all of this praise, with red carpets and everything else, and then you really give it to him. Instead, Trump gave it to himself. I mean, he just caved on every single issue. So not only did he give him the red carpet treatment, not only did he applaud those effusive smiles and everything else, that sent all the wrong signals. And people were absolutely right to say, this is outrageous because I mean, it's one thing if this is a more or less democratic leader, But this is an accused war criminal. This is a man who
Exactly.
started a war, who's perpetrating a genocide. I read someplace in the conservative press that, that's an invalid argument because, of course, Roosevelt met with Stalin and Nixon met with Mao Zedong, who were also mass murderers. But the difference there is that they happen to have been, Stalin was an ally against Nazi Germany. Again, for better or for worse, but he was a critically important ally. And Mao was important in pushing the China away from the Soviet Union. So both of them had an additional reason. Here, you're trying to stop a war that the war criminal began. And if you look at the Russian response, they are
Oh,
ecstatic, the
of
propagandists and
Course.
everybody else. I mean, this
woo,
is
of
a victory
course.
for Putin. Red carpet treatment. There's that photographs of those three soldiers unrolling the carpet, and they're
Hmm.
kneeling at the foot of the airplane. Now, of course, they're not kneeling, they're not genuflecting before
No.
Putin, but it certainly looks like they are.
Yeah.
And all of that was at best unnecessary, at worst quasi-criminal, because it really puts Trump in the same camp as Putin. And he didn't need to do that.
No.
On the other hand, he's done it with the president of El Salvador,
Yeah.
who's a
Right.
thug and a criminal. He alienates our allies. So
That's the
what
whole
else is
thing.
new?
Yeah. I mean, to alienate our allies, I believe that this is just my own personal opinion, does not think Putin is a murderer. How can you
Well,
not recognize it?
and of course, he's said in the past, he keeps on bombing. This is atrocious. He's even cursed with regard to Putin. So he must be aware. And, even if you don't, if you may want to avoid the word murderer. Okay, I get it. It's a diplomatic tete-a-tete. You don't want to alienate the other guy, right? Okay. Um, but that having been said, surely he must understand that this is a war that he began. Now, again, that having been said, you recall several months ago, he accused the Ukrainians of
Yeah.
starting the war.
Yes,
Right. I
And
mean,
we already talked about this on the program.
yes,
How could someone possibly make that
uh,
claim?
exactly.
You
exactly. I
know,
And
mean,
I don't understand why he keeps saying it's Biden's war.
well, for a simple reason, because he doesn't want to accept responsibility for the fact that he's failed, as certainly he failed this far.
exactly.
The war became his war, although he doesn't want to admit it, when he said he would solve it in 24 hours.
That's right.
Right.
Now every effort on his part or his minions to say, no, 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 this is still Biden's war. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're president for 7 months. You said you would solve this problem in 24 hours, and then you said it would be 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, 9 days, 10
Yeah.
days, whatever. Sorry, it's your war.
Oh yeah.
You
No,
can't
he
wiggle out
he
of this.
he cannot accept responsibility for anything. I mean, you name it, he will put it off on, oh, it was Biden. Oh no, it was Obama. I mean,
Oh,
No.
he
yes.
just no, I had nothing to do with it. It was them. And as you had mentioned, I mean, there is in all of this business, there is no acknowledgement whatsoever that Russia was the aggressor, that Russia invaded Ukraine, no sort of pushback.
I
Yeah.
wonder, you're right. And I wonder if having all these dignitaries come today with Zelensky, does that not make him feel, what does it make him feel? That
Well, on the one
they're
hand,
serious.
this is here. On the one hand, he's probably flattered, at least to some degree, since basically they've all come to pay respects to the emperor. So on the one hand, it's flattering. It's flattering to be told and to be considered to be the key to this problem. At the same time, I would be somewhat intimidated in his position. But again, we're talking about Trump, who's not intimidated by anything. He can mouth off and say stupid things in public, and except for a few journalists, everybody else claps and cheers.
Right.
These are 7 or 8 very important, men and women. very smart, and you can't pull a fast one over their eyes. I mean, it's just not going to work. And Trump has to be aware that he's dealing with people who were serious, maybe more serious than, but at least as serious as he claims to be.
Going back to the Alaska meeting, Trump did mention, well, he and Putin talked about the root of the war. Can you explain what that is?
Putin keeps on referring to something he calls the root causes. It's the deeper stuff that presumably really truly annoys him. And there are two ways of looking at these root causes. The root causes that he sees are, on the one hand, NATO expansion and the supposed threat that the imminent inclusion of Ukraine in NATO, which is a farce, as you know, that was never in the cards, would have posed for Russia. So hence his continual repetition of the fact of that refrain, Ukraine can't be a part of NATO. Although notice there's a contradiction here, because at the same time he's apparently said he would be willing for the United States and Europe to extend NATO-like guarantees to Ukraine. Now, what's the difference between being a member and just getting NATO-like
Yeah,
guarantees? It's the same thing.
right.
Mhm.
So his problem with NATO isn't really about the potential security threat that it poses. It's the fact that if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, that's another way of saying Ukraine is leaving Russia's sphere of influence. That's what bugs him. The other root cause that he sees, he keeps on insisting that Zelensky is a neo-Nazi. As you know, I mean, he's been saying this for 3.5 years. And what that means in Putin talk is that he wants Ukraine to be independent and democratic and a member of the West. All right. So he paints this boogeyman and calls it a Nazi, calls Ukraine a Nazi state. And of course, from his point of view, to denazify Ukraine means to get rid of Zelensky, to get rid of anybody who's a Zelensky lookalike, so to speak, who has the same political ideas, to demilitarize Ukraine, to stop its movement westwards, to destroy its democracy. In other words, to transform it into a vassal of Russia. The real problem with this Nazi business is that Putin has always had, frankly, for about 30, if not more years, he's been of the opinion that Ukrainians don't exist. They're simply a branch of the Russian people. The Ukrainian state is artificial and hence shouldn't exist either. And he's persuaded that if Ukrainians assert themselves as a nation, as a separate nation with a separate language, culture, and history, that this will undermine Russian imperial identity. Now, if I'm right about the root causes, and then some of the, then one can conclude the following. One is Trump seems to have no appreciation of the true root causes whatsoever, namely that Ukraine wants to be part of the West, wants to be democratic, and it wants to leave Russia's sphere of influence. He doesn't get that. And he doesn't seem to understand, despite the fact that Putin says this to his face, that Ukraine is critical to Russian identity and to Russian imperial expansion. And does
Yeah,
Trump understand that? My guess is yet.
probably not. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I just want to ask you this. I don't completely understand why, if the rest of NATO will agree to have Ukraine as part of them, what makes it stop? It's not going to be Putin, is it?
Well, the problem is that for a country to become a member, I mean, there's a procedure with a bunch of steps, but the bottom line is that at each step of the way, there has to be unanimous support on the part of existing NATO members. And as of this moment, the United States has said no. as have Hungary and the Slovakia. Everybody else is either on board or a little uncertain, but probably could be gotten on board. But all it takes is for Mr. Orban of Hungary to say "niet." I mean, even assuming, imagine Trump has a vision and decides that
Uh,
Ukraine should join tomorrow. Imagine the same holds true for Slovakia. Orban's one vote
yeah, can
will
just
be sufficient to prevent Ukraine from starting the membership process.
now Trump has signaled that he's open to or willing to provide some form of security guarantees for Ukraine now, but there's no elaboration as to like what that might entail. So do you believe that he sincerely means this?
Well, remember, this is one of the items that he said they'll be discussing and that they presumably are discussing as we speak. So, I don't know if he means it, but at least it will be seriously considered. The devil is in the details, right? So it's one thing to say we'll provide you with security guarantees, and then the other, it's totally different to spell out what would happen precisely if the Russians were to attack. Because remember in 1994, the Ukrainians, when they gave up their nuclear weapons, they signed something called the Budapest Memorandum, which ostensibly gave Ukraine security guarantees. And it was signed by the UK, France, the US, and Russia. Russia, right? But as it turned out, there were two versions. The Ukrainian language version spoke of guarantees. The English language version spoke of security assurances, which is another way of saying it's like we'll clap you on your back and say, go for it. We're with you. We really support you and your security, but other than that, we don't do anything at all. So it's all a question of what they would actually be willing to do, the Americans and the Europeans. Trump has suggested that the US would play a kind of a complementary secondary role. And that again is fair. It could continue to provide intelligence. It could provide radar coverage. It could certainly continue to, it might be able to provide some soldiers to guard ammunition dumps, but far from the front, something like that. But the bottom line is, now for any of this to be meaningful, they have to specify what will happen if Russia attacks. What will you do? And of course, they're attacking while they're talking. So ultimate irony.
And then what
Right.
does that say about Putin's true intentions?
This is where Trump is completely wrong. He keeps on saying, I believe that Putin wants peace. Well, that's like saying, I believe that Hitler wants peace. And he did. He wanted to kill all the Jews and he would have had peace.
All right.
And all the Ukrainians and Russians and Poles and Germans and French, and that would have been peace. I mean, it's the peace of the graveyard, which is exactly what Putin wants. He's not ready to compromise, which is why the so-called deal that Trump and Witkoff have floated, whereby the Russians want the remaining parts of the Donbass area that the
Yeah.
Ukrainians still control, and in exchange they'll say, and we won't attack anywhere else. That's supposed
Gee,
to be a swap. That's called
gee.
extortion, right? That's like the insurance business as performed by the mafia.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem is, you see, that he can't even agree to that, or at least not in the medium to long term. Back in 2022, Russia officially annexed all four of these contentious provinces. So Putin wants those parts of two provinces that he still doesn't hold. And
Yeah.
of course, he bases that on this annexation.
Mm.
And then he says, we're not going to attack and let you keep the territories of those other two provinces. But, do you believe him? No, he's just
No
going to
way.
say, well, we'll do this for a year, maybe two. And in the
Exactly.
meantime, we'll prepare our forces and we won't be attacking. We'll simply defending our
Uh-huh.
Russian territories from the Ukrainian neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a solution.
The simplest solution would be something like Korea. You declare an armistice, which is basically a ceasefire. You dig a big trench along the extent of the Ukrainian border with Russia, or along the current line of fighting, and you simply agree to disagree. The territory that Russia controls, no one will recognize it as being purely Russian. The Ukrainians certainly won't. But you want it, you got it. At least for forever, or for however long. And that's the end of the story. And that, again, would be possible. I mean, Zelensky would probably agree to this. And most Ukrainians would probably agree to this. They realize what they can and cannot achieve. And this is achievable. It's not great, but it's basically a recognition of the status quo. The problem, as always, is Putin. He can't agree to a ceasefire because that means that he's not liberating those 4 territories that he claimed are Russian. He's also made these enormous promises to the Russians. He's identified himself politically exclusively with the war. He is killing, it's not so much even the Ukrainians, roughly 1,000 soldiers a day. The number is now rapidly approaching 1,250,000 deaths and wounded, right? He can't just come home and say, well, we've lost 1 million soldiers, and I've gotten a little bit of these territories that I promised to get, but the rest, he can't do that. That'll undermine him politically at home with the elites and possibly even with the masses as well.
Trump has said in an interview he kept bringing up Biden and $350 billion going to Ukraine. Is that true?
I mean, that's absurd. I mean, the number is significantly less. It's more like 100 billion. And of that number, 90% actually went to U.S. armaments makers.
Right.
So
what does the United States do? They're not giving them money. And is it, from my own understanding, we take the military equipment and sell it to the allies?
Well, that's the plan. The idea is, first of all, the U.S. is providing Ukraine with intelligence. That's a big deal because that enables them to target infrastructure, boats, and things like that. But more importantly, or as importantly, is the fact that the United States has said we're not going to be supplying weapons to Ukraine anymore. Okay, fair enough. But if the Europeans buy them and then transfer them to Ukraine, that's cool. Which is actually a great idea, to be honest, because the US has been kvetching, rightly so, about the fact that the Europeans have been getting a free ride on security. I mean, this is one point, it's perhaps the only one on which I agree with Trump. But they have been getting a free ride. They haven't been spending what they're supposed to be spending. And this is a good way of getting them, to carry the burden. And after all, they are next door to Ukraine. So again, Trump has a point when he says it's really your problem more than it is ours. So the US supplies the weapons, the Europeans pay for it, the Americans get the money, and then in return, the Ukrainians get the stuff they need. So it's kind of a win-win-win. And if that continues, that would be okay.
We'll see what happens. Well, Alex, as usual, this has been terrific. It helps, it's helping us shed some light on this crazy, complicated situation, crazy dynamics.
Great to talk to you.
It's always my pleasure, ladies.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.